I would like to begin by thanking Shri Kapaleshwar Swami for giving us this opportunity of actually hosting this event right in the shadows of the great temple. And I would also like to thank the audience for extending me the privilege um, of not speaking to empty chairs, since the since the session is already extended by an hour or more than that. So I'll try to keep it short, but at the same time, there are some friends who've come to specifically to listen to me, so I don't want to really cut it too short, and I'll try and do a balancing act like our great politicians. Um I'll jump right into the topic now. So my topic is Dharma, ecology, and the future of pilgrimage. And if you think about this topic, all these words, dharma, ecology, and the future, they are all contextual. They cannot be um, they cannot be summed up in just a sentence. You will have to give a broad context to each of these words for someone to really understand what these words really mean in a certain context. um, Ecology, again, we talk about ecosystems. So the study of ecosystems is ecology, and ecosystems could vary from social ecosystems to natural ecosystems to cultural ecosystems and what have you. Again, future is something that it's our favorite pastime to think about the future, but no one really figures it out. So again, future is also something which is up in the air for everyone to figure out what it really is, and so on and so forth. I suppose the most firm definition that one could give in this whole phrase of dharma, ecology, and the future of pilgrimage is a pilgrimage. But I would argue that even that is not the case, because what essentially constitutes a pilgrimage um, is up for review, is up for speculation again. Since we've lost touch with our own culture and heritage, uh, it has become very difficult to come to a consensus about what it means to visit a, a shrine or a great kshetram. Um, on December 31st, 2018, I visited the Vaishno Devi temple in Jammu, which is my home state. And I went there specifically with the idea of going on a day which was, the peak of winters. Um, and in my last visit in the winters, I had experienced very little crowd. So I was particularly keen on going in the harshest of the season, so that I would have a reasonable darshan of the Devi. Unfortunately, that day, it turned out to be the busiest day on top of the hill, with about 150,000, 1.5 lakh people on that small spot. And I'm not sure if how many of you have actually visited the shrine, but it's maybe 1 square kilometer is the top of the hill where the mother resides, and packing 1.5 lakh people on that small space in itself is a miracle, and people coming out alive of that from that experience is another miracle. So the fact that I'm standing here is testimony to the miracles of our great devis and devatas. Now the point is that this was one experience. Then a couple of months down the line, I visited the Kumbh Mela, and it had perhaps an equal number of pilgrims visiting on the day. I went on the day of the Shahi Snan. However, the more the numbers in Kumbh, the greater the joy, uh, or so I experienced it. And I was wondering, what is the difference between these two places? Where at one place I was feeling, uh, I was really feeling that there was a danger to to the lives of the people who had visited, uh, as well as the sanctity of the shrine. And there was this other place, that is the Kumbh Mela, where so many more people could have even come, and perhaps on other days did come, and yet there did not seem to be such an issue, at least to me, from a subjective standpoint. Uh, And so I sort of came to this conclusion that it is, again, like I was talking about the other words, dharma, ecology, and future, pilgrimage is again contextual, and you will have to sort of make a judgment on the kind of pilgrimage that you are undertaking and what suits each pilgrim point. Uh, so today is January 19th. It also happens to be the day when my community was kicked out of the Kashmir Valley. And more than a political issue or more than a geopolitical international problem or conflict situation, I view that as a loss of kshetram, a loss of access to the marvels of Kashmir, which include intellectual, cultural, and spiritual marvels that the land has given uh, this civilization. Uh, to me, the loss of the loss of a kshetram consists of three different uh, subsets, so to speak. There is a one at one level. There is the demographic change which happens, uh, and Kashmir has experienced that from the 14th century to the current times. That there has been a actual demographic inversion from a place which was 100% Hindu at one time to when the handful of Hindus were kicked out in 1990. So there was a demographic change that happened. So that is something that we lost there, the number of people that we had there. And consequently, there was a loss of culture and community as well. My community is a very close knit community because of the sheer smallness, the size of the community is so small that we held on to our rituals and traditions so dearly, like dear life itself, and therefore, we are one of the most orthodox communities remaining in India, which is fast changing because now we have no sense of community at all. So a loss of culture and community is also a loss of kshetram. That also comes from the same problem. And the third is, of course, which is the most gross of these aspects, which is the loss of territory. And when we talk about uh, Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that is basically what we are referring to, that we have actually lost territory physically. So, uh, again, a loss of territory can be political, as it happened in 1947, where we lost a chunk of our land to Pakistan, or it could be ecological, where we have so changed the nature of a place. We've cut down the forests, we've built dams on rivers, um, and we've, I mean, there is so much man made intervention in a place that we end up changing the nature of the place itself, which is equivalent to losing territory. And in Kashmir, the contrast is very stark in that we've lost everything, but I argue that in other places like the Kedarnath video that you just saw, in Kedarnath, we are losing territory to mindless commercialization and to the sheer number of people who visit the shrine. Interestingly, when we came out with this Kedarnath video, it's just a 2-minute video. There is, I mean, you just saw it. It only asks certain questions. It is not about, it is not giving a sermon on how you should, how you should deal with the crisis. It is basically asking questions about whether mass commercialization of this kind should even be allowed. I mean, what is happening to us as a community where we can't take care of our own dear places? Um, but the kind of reaction that this video got, just this 2-minute video, from the sympathetic side of Twitter, so to speak, that is people who are politically active Hindus, right? People who believe in the civilizational um, resurgence of India, people who actually vote for the right party, right? And the kind of reaction that we got, it dumbfounded me because we were not really talking about anything other than just basic common sense. And I admit that we could be wrong in a lot of ways, but how much can a 2-minute video even say, as you just saw? But uh, The reaction told me a few things about the state of Hindu community in general. One, one of the arguments that came our way was that, you should either talk about dharma or you should talk about ecology. You know, एक बात बोलो. No, to no one in this, from the other side, did it occur that dharma is ecology. If you don't take care of your panchabhutas, you're basically giving up on dharma. I mean, it's as simple as that. Uh, then there was also this discourse about who are you to talk, who are you to say that people should be restricted, the number of people visiting a particular shrine should be restricted. Now, we did not say that we will decide. We said that there should be a mechanism which comes out of all this, churning, and that mechanism, however it is framed, whether, what are the legal aspects of it, what are the political aspects, who are the stakeholders, all that needed to be decided. But yeah, I mean, the question is that the number of people visiting should be restricted in some way because it is damaging the physical structure of the place, right? um, but the discourse was constantly about rights. What about my old father? He went last year, and what if he was not allowed, and this would have been so bad. And I mean, I didn't even know how to respond to these things because, as we all know, there was a time when pilgrimages like Kedarnath, they were made with the clear understanding that if you are going, you're probably not coming back, right? And I don't say that we go back to those times. However, what it suggests is that the kind of pilgrimage that Kedarnath is, um, demands of you certain sacrifices. And if you're not ready to make those sacrifices, and if you're treating this as some kind of a visit to a mall where it is your right to enter the place, then you're basically turning the entire logic of Hinduism on its head. So, this rights versus privilege uh, dichotomy was there. And thirdly, there was a lot of this recourse to binaries and certain identities. For example, uh, tribalism came into play when people said that, oh, it's just the locals who are supposed to have a voice in these matters, and we are the ones who are sitting there and we are suffering because of whatever is happening, and we are the ones whose bread earning is linked to all this, to the people coming and to the number of pilgrims that are coming to Kedarnath. So we should have a say. On the other hand, there were other people who said, no, 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 we've actually come back. So this whole discussion went to such absurd levels that people started talking about who came from Rajasthan to settle in Garhwal in the 15th century, and therefore it is our right to say these things. And this went to totally insane levels, and then I had to sort of withdraw from the conversation. The point is that this whole discourse was about identities of all kinds, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, but there are identities and binaries at play that need this dialectic conversation between opposing conflicts of interest, of opposing thoughts, needs to be encouraged. That is the point. However, there was only belligerence and a lot of noise from just one section who probably had a conflict of interest uh, in extending this kind of tourism uh, to an indefinite time in the future. Now, this comes to the fundamental change uh, in the point of view of the people of India when it comes to looking at nature, and we are all aware of these issues and the discourse around nature as a resource. When we start viewing nature as a resource, then it becomes imperative on us to dominate it and to control it, as opposed to harmonizing our lives with its imperatives. But this goes all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, and it goes all the way back to when resource for private industry was required, and they went ahead with these enclosures where people with the commons, that is the access to commons, was restricted, like commons like rivers. For example, if someone had to set up a fishery, and the number of fish required to feed the industry was so suddenly spiked up. So therefore, they had to sort of privatize those areas and restrict access to the local villagers, for example, to the same areas. And then these global and these capitalists then sort of expanded all through the world. And this eventually led to imperialism, where because they were looking for raw materials in Europe, and not everything was available there, and the industry kept demanding more and more, like a endless pit. And so they had to look outside into the to the other continents, and India was one of the victims of that drive. And so imperialism, I mean, these imperial powers went all across the world, and they went to South America, they went to Africa, they went to India, and they exploited the natural resources of these countries. Uh, Eventually, they also needed those markets where they could use these after the raw materials were used and the finished goods came by, and they had to somehow sell these goods. And so this became a vicious circle, and these goods were eventually dumped to these same markets. And this eventually finally gave rise to global capitalism. So today, when we glamorously refer to global capitalism and the world is one village, and there is this whole idea, especially as a kid growing up in the 90s, I was particularly fascinated by these Coke and Pepsi and all kinds of new brands coming to India. And this glamour is an absolute necessity when you have to sell something which is basically on very or very shaky foundations, right? So now this global capitalism, this what do you call it? This giant that emerged from this course of history. Um, there was a need to legitimize it. There was a need to make this palatable to people, and to somehow spin a story around it and sell it to people, saying that this is what is right, this is what is moral, this is what is ethical. And that job was finally done by the great lawyers, like my good friend Sai Deepak sitting here. And so law and jurisprudence became a tool to perpetuate the demands of this global capitalist society, where there was a dichotomy, there was a seesaw sort of relationship between the private private ownership and state sovereignty. Wherever private ownership decreased, state became more powerful. Wherever state decreased, state influence decreased, or state sovereignty became low, then private ownership became higher. This was a zero sum game. In this course, the common person who had access uh, to the forests and the rivers. For example, I as someone living in Delhi, if I were to do something about the cleanliness of Yamuna, I have no way in which I can do anything about it unless I pull together all my resources and go to the court and spend a huge amount of money, raise money and all that, and hire the right people. There is no way in which I have an agency and I have a say in cleaning my air, in cleaning my water, having access to these things. So when we talk about law addressing these problems, what we forget is that law evolved in a way to serve these interests. And now, if we accept, if we expect that the same law will suddenly grow this spine and teeth to take on the very demon it is supposed to serve, then I think that we are completely missing the picture here. Now, you might be wondering why I brought in all this. Uh, I would just like to quote this British adventurer T.J. Saunders, where he had to say this about how you could actually destroy idolatry as in Hinduism. So, I quote, "The surest way of letting idolatry die a natural death is to make it cheap and common and easy of access." So, when we celebrate the building of four-lane highways and great hotels and comforts at these ecologically sensitive zones like Kedarnath, we are actually fulfilling these prophetic words by Saunders, right? And this was the general sentiment among the British at that time. And it would be unfair to say that that they had this kind of clarity to do this. I mean, they were also conflicted. There were different schools of thought. But I found this particular quote to be particularly relevant in the present times and prophetic as well. So these uh, these pilgrimages, there are a number of stakeholders, as I was mentioning, and because we're talking about identities, we're talking about outsiders and insiders and conflicts of interest. There are the locals, there are the purohits at these temples, there is the government, and there is the state government, and there's the central government, and they have different priorities. You have sadhus, you have pilgrims, and then you have finally tourists of the kind who are dancing in front of the shrine. So, in some sense, all of them have a skin in the game. All of them have something to lose if the decision or if things take a certain turn. So, it is not, it would be unfair to actually single out a single identity or a single group of people or a single community and say that, hey, this is the one who is supposed to have the final answer. That is not going to happen. So this is an emergent kind of situation where it is extremely important to have these conversations going. Unfortunately, the conversations are only going in a certain direction, and they're completely skewed. The discourse is so skewed that anything which is said in to question this is immediately deemed to be anti-national or anti-development, anti-science. All those labels are stuck. However, if you look at the kind of local narratives, right, when we are talking about the Terry Dam, for example, the Terry Dam, when it came up, there was a lot of local resistance to its commissioning. And today, all that has gone. Now, the locals are actually celebrating. They're saying it's a great opportunity. Now, we'll develop a picnic park, or we'll develop a water park there, and there'll be water sports going on and all that. So, they see an economic incentive there. And whatever their forefathers or whatever their previous generation had protested against, they are speaking the reverse language. So this change in narrative happens over time. So there's nothing surprising about it, and no one has a final answer to these things. But when the Kedarnath floods happened, there are two things that are usually not spoken about, and that is a traditional view. That is the view of the locals who were practicing and who were observant Hindus. One is that just the day before the floods happened, there was this temple of the guardian of the Kedarnath shrine, that is the Dhari Devi temple, which was where the murti was removed and the temple was demolished. And within a few hours, the floods came along. And while this demolition was going on the talk of this demolition was going on, there was a long it was preceded by a lot of resistance by the locals saying that if you move this, there is going to be problem. And that eventually happened. Now, it is very difficult to sort of accommodate this within the scientific view and all that. But we are talking about narratives here. We are talking about what the local people believed in. And second, there was a 2011 animal sacrifice ban, which happened in one of the Devi temples there in Uttarakhand. And that again was followed by a lot of resistance from people saying that this is not something that you should be doing. Don't meddle with these traditions. However, it went on. And when the floods finally happened, it was the same locals uh, who brought back this argument that, look, you shouldn't have done it. So there are a lot of narratives which are competing narratives even within the local community, which is supposedly benefiting from the economic development. And it's in some sense like a question of consent. The consent is not a clear line which is drawn and said that this is how, whether I say yes or no, that is the final answer, because there is always room for changing your mind when more information is brought in. Similarly, when a local is asked for his opinion, there is always a chance that if you provide more information, they will change that opinion. So I see the local trapped in this, what I would call a Sherpa narrative, right? The Sherpas of Nepal, who organize most of these trekking expeditions and mountaineering expeditions in the Himalayas of Nepal, including the Mount Everest. Uh, these are people who are trapped in their own um economic web. Uh, they know for a fact and they believe that desecrating the mountain is something that is not correct for them religiously or morally. They hate every moment when they are walking on top of that mountain, because for them it is the presiding deity of the region. However, because they are trapped, they don't really know. I mean, because this also gets them a lot of money, they don't really know how to get out of it. And whenever some Sherpa dies in an accident or an avalanche, they rationalize it, saying that, look, this is something that we are not, we should not be doing. However, we are doing it, so these one two people dying here and there is all okay. So that's how they rationalize it. And I see the same thing which is happening in Himachal and Uttarakhand, in India as well, where people are actually not happy with what is going on. However, because they're trapped in this larger economy, they they can't really get out of it. So it becomes important for the policy to emerge in a way that addresses these very fundamental conflicts in their minds. And there are so many forces which are acting, which are at play in these sensitive zones. It is the market forces, there is politics which is happening, there is the weather and climate, there is geology, there is religion, there is the trauma, there is the historical trauma which the 2013 flood brings into people who experienced it. So to have a very clear answer is just not possible. We don't really know how to go forward. However, I think that it is important that we uh, acknowledge that the situation is emergent, that we don't have any clear answers, and that dialogue and debate and discussion be encouraged, and the local authorities, including the government, be pulled into these discussions uh, and made to think about how we envision a future for these shrines. And so there are just two takeaways that I would like to give here for this session, which is that, one, I think that it is absolutely necessary for us to be sympathetic to the view that pilgrim traffic needs to be regulated somehow. What mechanisms we will evolve to deal with that is a different matter. I think that should be given. There should be enough room for debate and discussion and nuance, and then slowly a solution would emerge over the years. So that is one. And secondly, I think it is important that we work in the direction of bringing back commons into the very theory of law that governs this country, where we talk about empowering local communities in taking decisions that solve their fundamental issues with the environment. If the air is not clean, if the water is not clean, I should have some agency as an individual to be able to have a say in the matter, to be able to do something about it. And that should not just be restricted to activism, because that's a very narrow area of operation. Like I said, you would have to have access to the right resources, right talent, money power, changes. And then these court cases go on forever. So we need to have some sort of a mechanism to be able to do away with just this very conventional approach of the last few decades, and come up with uh, fundamental changes in the theory of law itself. And I think a lot of research should be directed in that direction. And we at Indic Collective are committed to at least taking this conversation forward, taking research along this direction forward, so that we are able to get some kind of an outcome within the periods that we are alive on this earth. So that at least while leaving this mortal frame, we don't go dejected with the thought that we weren't able to do anything uh, for these very shrines that gave us everything that we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashish. I request you to give the vote of thanks.
I think I gave the vote of thanks in the beginning of my talk itself. But I would again like to thank all of you, and I hope that today's session was fruitful and useful. We will hopefully come back to the same city. We're planning to do Kshetrayanams in different cities, and hopefully we'll see you in Chennai again. And please do support our work. Please do support Indic Collective, People for Dharma, Upward, and Pragyata. You have this pamphlet with you where there is a QR code, and I'm making a very explicit appeal because I don't think we have the time for niceties anymore. So if you could just look at the various subscriptions and support Indic Collective in whatever way possible. So some of these problems that we discussed today, we could take these to the logical conclusion. Thank you very much.